today I'm excited because I've got some friends here with us, and what we want to do today, as we're talking about parenting, one of the sort of communities that I think are really overlooked, and we want to build awareness in our congregation, is how can we foster a community of compassion and empathy and partnership with children who have special needs or different abilities. And so I've got some folks here today with different experiences, different backgrounds, and I want to introduce you to them. And so we're going to go down the line. I want you to tell us who you are and sort of what your experience is in working with children with special needs, or what that introduction was like for you.
Yeah, hey, good morning, everybody. I am Rashia, and God blessed me with a beautiful little boy named Jackson, who is autistic.
My name is Evelyn Villamar. My experience with kids on the spectrum and special needs is pretty extensive. I have a I think he's 26 now, year-old brother who was diagnosed with autism when he was 5. That kind of led me on this journey to learn more. I got my bachelor's degree in health science with a concentration in disability studies, and then went on to get my master's in special education, focusing on curriculum instruction using applied behavior analysis. And then in 2017, got my board certification in applied behavior analysis, and currently I am the clinical director of a center who provides ABA services for kids on the spectrum.
Good morning. My name is Terrence Crawford, and I have a 3, almost 4-year-old son named Trey, who's diagnosed with Down syndrome.
Good morning, HopeX. I'm Lydia Williams. Like Evelyn, I'm also board certified behavior analyst, so clinically I work with children on the spectrum, but God also equipped me for my journey. So my son actually is AJ. He will be 4 next month, and he's also on the spectrum.
Thank you for that. Now,
Oh wait, can I add something really quickly?
yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Let's go.
I just also wanted to add that I have a son that was diagnosed with ADHD 2 years ago, and it turns out that I also have ADHD. So I am also neurodiverse as well.
All right. I like what you said. Would you say neurospicy?
Yeah, we're neurospicy high school. Yes, for sure.
I love it. So today what we want to do is just have a conversation that I feel like churches are not having. And not to say that we're better than any other church, but what we want to establish as our identity and who we want to be and how we want to show up and be the hands and feet of Jesus here in our community. This is one of the things that we want to shed light on and bring awareness to. Now, can you tell us about your personal journey and when you received the diagnosis? Like, how was that for you? Were you familiar with children with special needs? Was this your first experience? Just kind of tell us about that.
Yeah, so Jackson was diagnosed pretty early. I noticed some things that were a little off to me when he was just a baby. I tell people all the time he had this little strange little army crawl, and it was cute for a while, but it kind of continued on, and it made me just aware. I took this conversation to his pediatrician, and we had him tested, and initially it was diagnosed as a developmental delay. So we knew we were leaving Michigan. We moved down here to Georgia, and upon arriving to Georgia, Jackson was still not walking yet. He ended up walking and really starting to take those first steps around 18 months. And we had him diagnosed for autism, and well, not diagnosed, but we had him tested, and of course we went through the process, and then he was diagnosed for autism. A couple of things that stood out to me: Jackson, he likes to spin around in circles, and as a parent, I'm thinking, he's just 2, he's just 3 years old, that's what kids do. But what the physician helped me realize was that's him stimming, and he has his eyes set on something. So those are signs of a child with autism. So that was really my first experience with it. Jackson is the first person on my side of the family diagnosed. I didn't know anything about it. The diagnosis was extremely scary. I boo-hooed, I cried upon receiving that diagnosis because I had in my mind that I cannot do this. What punishment am I receiving right now? why is God do this is something that I did in my college year. Like, he is really like coming back for me, and this is my punishment. And just speaking frankly, that's how I felt. And I went through a grieving process, finding out this diagnosis for my son. But through counseling and through just support and people like these women on the stage and you guys, through that support, I was able to learn a lot more about his diagnosis, and then just have that community and family to support me throughout. So that's kind of like the short version of my experience thus far.
What about you, Terrence? What was your initial encounter with the diagnosis? How are you feeling? What was that like for you?
So I found out that my son would be born with Down syndrome. Well, the medical term for it is trisomy 21. I found out he would have that at 20 weeks. So from that time, I had enough time to kind of, do my research. Initially, first finding out, of course, I cried because, I didn't know much about Down syndrome or trisomy 21. I really didn't come into contact with people with disabilities that much. But a lot of times, you don't really see how much something is happening until it starts to happen to you. And then once I found out my son would have this disability, then I started recognizing that a lot of more people have it. So I just took that time when I found out at that 20-week ultrasound, just started doing my research and started preparing myself. But it was definitely difficult hearing that initially, but I just knew I had an uphill battle, and I just was prepared for it.
What about for you?
So like I mentioned before, how looking back now, like God equipped me because I became a clinician before I was even pregnant. And then when I had AJ, everything was perfectly fine, but I started to notice different signs. I went to the pediatrician and was like, look, I know I may be hypersensitive or hyper-aware because I work with kids on the spectrum, but I'm pretty sure my kid's on the spectrum. Whereas AJ's father took, a longer time to come to terms, to accept, to be open to even getting him tested. So receiving the diagnosis for me was more confirmation, and so I'm very blessed to have been in that space.
Yeah. Just a quick thing. Raise your hand if you know someone who has children with special needs or have come in contact with a family or loved one who has children with special needs. Most of us in the room. Can you talk about the grief process? Is there a grief process? Do you grieve in hearing a diagnosis? What is that like? Do you grieve? Do you not grieve? What should our response be? And I'm going to pitch it to you, Evelyn. You can kick us off, and then everybody just kind of chime in.
Parents definitely grieve, right? I think about my parents. I didn't share my first experience with an autism diagnosis, but I experienced it firsthand through the lens of a sibling, right? Another child, seeing their parents going through that, right? And so there was definitely grief there. Both of my parents were really devastated. He received the diagnosis really late, right? 5 years old is late now, but at that time was pretty common because autism wasn't a thing that people were really talking about. And so, I did see my parents struggle greatly with not knowing what was going to happen. And so I see that with parents that I work with today, right? They have to kind of come to terms with that, the expectation that they had is not the expectation that might be. When every parent, when we know that we're gonna bring a child on this planet, we start painting this picture, and then for a while we bring that baby earthside, and that picture's still there, right? It's very bright, and then you find out that you don't even know what that picture's gonna look like, and so that's something really hard for parents to come to terms with. But what I always say is give them the space to do that, right? Making sure that we're holding our parents that are going through that process, allowing them to be sad, to let go of that picture, right? Envision a different one, right? Help them paint the new picture if you can. And also knowing that they're not alone, because in the isolation is like where some parents then kind of turn away and they become lonely and they isolate, and it just isn't good for them in terms of like their mental health, the education that they're receiving for their kiddo, and how they're going to advocate for them.
And how do you like navigate society's expectations as you're grieving and as you're like trying to figure things out for yourself as well, like whether it be family expectations, society expectations?
Yeah, I can say speaking up for yourself. That has been huge because we did have to go through a grieving process. I know myself personally, my husband had to deal with it in his own way. But as I dealt with that, I had to then turn around and teach my family how to work with my child and even just let them understand the reality that, yes, he really does have autism. Because when you tell people the diagnosis, they're like, oh, no, it's not that. Despite the fact that you've gone to several professionals, several doctors, and your family, Big Mama still knows best, right? So we're still going off of what she says. Like, you know, he doesn't have autism. He'll be okay. He's too young to be diagnosed. So you're fighting with what you've been told professionally, the people whom you know and love and, you know, who you're in the same house with. So it definitely takes advocating for your child, especially out in society and even in our families and in our own homes. I had to do that with Jackson. One of the things that people say, like, oh, he's so cute, he doesn't look like he has autism. But autism doesn't necessarily have a look. Right. You know, it's a spectrum, so it can vary from different looks. So really just advocating for Jackson and educating people when we have the opportunity, like times like this, like that's really how I go about it.
Yeah. I know our babies are young, right? So we may have grieved in the early stage when you find that diagnosis out, but grow up, they go through adolescence, they become adults, and they age out of services. So grieving, you may grieve in multiple stages, right? Grief comes and goes. So don't forget about the parents who have adults with people, you know, with children on the spectrums too. Or when, you know, Trey is 20, like you may go through that grieving process again, because what does that look like for my baby, still my baby, but now he's an adult in society, right? And so still holding space for families at whatever stage that they're at and realizing that grief does come and go. And so just creating space for families at whatever stage they're at.
That's good. Now I'm gonna move on to another question. Did you want to chime in? All right. So what I want to know is, because it's not just the families or the parents who receive the diagnoses. Like, we're here in the church community, but I've got a brother or a sister and an auntie. Like, what can you say to us and how we can show up better for our friends and our loved ones and our families and support them and truly, so that they don't feel like they're alone? Like, how can we show up?
Yeah, definitely be that listening ear. Allow for them to grieve, allow for them to have that space to just talk. Because I can't tell you how many thoughts that I've had. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't feel like that as a mom, or maybe that thought was bad, but having someone to listen to the thought is just very important. And one thing that, if anybody saw Jackson come in the door this morning, he's a runner, guys. So if you see my baby running and you run faster than me, help. You know, but treat him like any other kid, you know, definitely so. Like, just love on him, treat him like any other kid. But yeah, that's definitely.
I think the most important part is that transparency piece, right? I think parents they don't want you to assume. I think they would much rather you ask, right? And so if you have a question, ask it, right? I think tone, right, is everything. And so the way you be mindful on how you ask your question, but ask it, because I would much rather you ask than assume. of what's going on. This, like we said earlier, autism, it's called autism spectrum disorder because it's a spectrum of abilities, right? They always say you meet one kid with autism, you met that one kid with autism. Autism does not look the same from one kid to another. It's a range of abilities and it's a range of like support needs. And so never assume that when a parent says, oh, my child has autism or my child has Downs, that you're automatically assuming or limiting what that child can do. I would say ask that parent. And the same thing that Rashia said, right? We are loving on these babies no matter what, right? Because these are precious gifts from God. And so like we shouldn't be loving them any other way.
Just basically, ultimately, just understanding that, no matter what the diagnosis is, that the term kid or child comes before that diagnosis. So as long as you remember that you're still dealing with the child at the end of the day and just treat them and respect them and love them like you would any other child, I think everything would be fine. Just try not to, just try not to treat them any different than you would treat anyone else. Just, try to be as normal with them as possible. Yeah. And because anything less than that is not really helping them. Right. It's kind of being a hindrance to them because ultimately, as they progress in life, everyone's not going to be as gentle with them as we are. So you just got to just continue to just treat them like you would treat anyone else.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what everybody else has said, but I think the biggest thing for me is like seeing my kids interact with your guys' kids, right? And so it does start with you as a parent. So the more you're open to accepting and inviting families with children, kids, adults on whatever spectrum or with whatever diagnosis, again, creating space and being that place of acceptance and inclusion. And so just treating my child like anybody else, and shout out to everybody who has loved on AJ. That's a, that warms my heart, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think, as you all said, just even understanding the heart of God and seeing our kids as a gift from God. Like, we all know children are a gift from God. Yeah. And so understanding that even children with different abilities or certain support needs are a gift from God, and they're a blessing and not a burden. And I think you guys said it so clear when we're seeing these kids as kids and not as like something different or a different whatever, like embracing that. Let me ask it in this way. How can we improve even our language around referring to, because Terrence, you brought it up, like putting the child before the diagnosis. So, but how can we improve even our language and how we're referring to children or in talking with parents so that we're having inclusive language and language that honors children no matter where they are at?
I think it depends on the parent, and I think that that's where the transparency piece comes in, right? If the parent gives you that information about their child, hey, my kiddo is on the spectrum, then you can always ask, like, what do you prefer, right? Because we have a community of adults with autism that prefer to be identified as autistic, right? But right now, our babies can't choose that for themselves, right? They can choose that later on. They can't choose that for themselves. So really asking the parent what they feel the most comfortable with. What are, like, when you're talking about this diagnosis, how are we referring to, right? Are we referring to it as a child with autism? Or are you just saying he's autistic? Again, I think that transparency piece, and I think a parent just appreciates in general that you're having that back and forth with them, because on the day-to-day, people are not having those conversations with parents. They're just automatically assuming. And so a lot of the times I'm met with that, just simple appreciation for asking the questions, right? so that they feel the most comfortable. I wanted to go back a little bit because I wanted to say that as a congregation, right, Miss Lydia and I, we attended this conference, this Ignite conference, and they talked about building up a special needs ministry or how to make your congregation more inclusive to those with special needs. And the biggest thing there was toleration versus inclusion, right? And I think that that's, as a church body, that's what we need to be thinking about. We're not simply just tolerating kids with special needs, right? Okay, cool, that's nice, we have them in our population. No, right? It's including them in the fan festivities, including them in class, right? Like, we do everything that we can to make sure that Trey and Jackson are in that lesson, right? We might have to redirect a couple of times, but they are on that carpet, right? And we're trying to make sure that they're getting at least just a sliver of whatever the lesson is. Because if they got that, we succeeded for the day, right? And so really making sure that we're simply not just like, yep, I'm cool with that. Okay, you're cool with that, but how are you cool with that, right? And so that all goes from the moment you step into this church, how you're greeting your parents, how you're greeting your kiddos, the conversations that you're having. You're making sure that they feel like they are part of this family, right?
Go ahead.
I'm just going to add that, yes, it's a disability, or the official diagnosis is disorder, right? But my child has a different ability than yours, than myself. And so treating them the same, but also recognizing that they may need different accommodations or a different approach. So still celebrating the difference and realizing there is a difference, and that it's just a different ability that they have.
I love that, and that's easy for us to just remember that this may be a different ability. And you said something about how we as a church can move towards not just tolerance but inclusivity. I want to talk about this because there might be some people sitting there going, "Come on, this is Sunday. Now, why ain't he up there hollering like he normally does? You know, why are we even having this conversation? How important was it for you in finding a faith community that was able to include your child? Like, what type of considerations were you taking in selecting what church you'd be a part of based on how they interacted or didn't interact with your child? Both of you can kind of chime in.
Yeah, it was definitely paramount for us to find somewhere that included Jackson. When we were in Detroit, we went to a church, everything was fine. My best friend served on a kids ministry, and she had a kid with autism. So it's nothing that I had to worry about in that moment. But when we moved down here to Georgia and searching for a church home, not only did we need a church that filled us, but also filled Jackson as well. One of the reasons that we chose HopeX is because when we walked in, I will never forget the love that was received, not only from these two women, but like the entire children's ministry. Like, come here, like, I love Jackson, let me love on him. And it was such a good feeling and experience to have someone love my child and give them like genuine love like I do. It's one thing, kids are very discerning as well. So if Jackson did not feel comfortable, we would know it. And the fact that when we walked in here on Sundays and he's beelining from the front door, running to that classroom, that was definitely a sign that let us know that, okay, we're exactly where we need to be. And then when I found out that the both of them were, board certified BCBAs, I'm like, God, you are still here, you are still with us, and you are guiding us. So that was definitely one of those deciding factors of, okay, Jackson feels comfortable here. I literally have people who understand Jackson, who he is, and they love him. Absolutely, this is the place to be.
I'm just speak as a man. Most places we go, we're seen as the protectors, and we take on the responsibility of protecting. But when I'm here with my son, this is a place where I also feel protected. And that's very, very important as a man to also know that you're protected as well. You don't have to always be the protector. And whenever my son is, with Miss Lydia or Miss Evelyn, I just feel that, he's taken care of as well as like I would do. He's protected. And, I appreciate Pastor Miller, his wife. I appreciate everyone for just like loving and accepting my son, because I can come to church for a few hours and just relax and enjoy and not necessarily have to be, well, I'm always on go mode for my son, but, just not having to be on edge as much. Just I can just come and relax, and like I said, just know and understand that he's good. And that's very important as a man to have that feeling of security when you go someplace as well.
You ain't get me today. You ain't get me today. You get yours, not get me. Not get me. Listen, can we just shout out our kids team and our kids team leaders for all the ways that they show up for our kiddos. One of the things that is important for us to understand just about church in general, we say it all the time from the platforms, like the church is not the building. Like we, the people, we are the church. And even when you say things like, oh, we're going to launch a church, you don't really know what that church is going to look like until the people show up, because that's what defines the church. And so our heart for what we want to do for the community doesn't even really just exist within my heart or in my mind. It's really when the people of God come together and say that this is the burden that we share and that we carry and that we want to be a part of. And so what I love about this is, like, I didn't say, hey, we want to, build an inclusive space for children with special needs or anything like this. It was almost like God was, like, bringing people together in a very unique way, like the way that Lydia and Evelyn kind of just talk a little bit about how you guys even came together and started shaping this heart for, and you've been pouring into our kids team as well.
So I Instagram stalked Evelyn when I saw her profile said BCBA, and her husband James had kind of joined the team beforehand, so I was like, James, your wife's a BCBA, like, you need to connect us, like, come on, you right? And I kept, like, every time Evelyn would come, I'd just be like, hey, let's get coffee. And she would, like, yeah, okay. And then, God. So, yeah.
No, I'll never forget it. So autism brought me to Georgia. Like, I'm not from Georgia. I'm from New York. The service providers that I worked for at the time were like, hey, Georgia is a very big state and they have a lot of needs for ABA. We would love for you to go down there and, like, help us open up the center. And it was lovely. I came down. It was very nice. And then a year later, we walk into HopeX, and, we were just looking for a church home. We were just looking for a church we liked. And just like a couple of Sundays in, James was like, babe, did you know that the director of the children's ministry is a BCBA? Like, aren't those rare here in Georgia?
He sounds just like that, guys. That's why everybody's laughing.
And I'm like, it is. And he's like, don't you want more BCBA friends? And I was like, I guess, yeah, maybe. And so, like, that's how we kind of went in there. But we share the same passions. I think we have very similar visions of what we see our kid ministry looking like. It's really beautiful to see where it is just like a year later, and how much we've grown. Looking at the FanFest pics, I see, like, all these people on stage, and I'm like, where did all these people come from? It's God, right? Like, it's lovely.
God. It's God, yeah, absolutely. I think about Jesus in the scriptures and how we're introduced to him, and anytime you see someone who isn't able to advocate for themselves or is what the society would say is the outcast, there you can find Jesus. There you can find Jesus being a voice for the voiceless, being an advocate for those who are unable to advocate for themselves. And when you think about Christ's likeness and being more like Christ, that's who we want to be. That's who we want to be as a church. We celebrate the gift that is all children. Can we just talk about, like, because I don't think people really understand what are the gifts and the special abilities that children that are on the spectrum or have different abilities have. Like, many of us just are unfamiliar. We don't know. Like, we don't know. Tell us about the gift that is that you've experienced with your children and others.
Yeah, so Jackson's gift, and it really does make me smile. When he was about 2 years old, he's looking at the TV, and we're a PBS family, okay? So we're watching PBS, and they're thanking their sponsors, and the word thank you comes across the TV, and he goes, thank you. And I look at Rashad, I was, did he just read that? Like, did he read that? So in the autism community, they call them superpowers. So Jackson's superpower is that he can read. He may not always speak it, but he can definitely read it. And he loves counting and numbers. And it's beautiful to see because instantly, you know, when you have a child with autism, you think, oh my God, what are the things that they cannot do? These are the things that are stacked against my child, and this is what they won't be able to experience. But when I took a step back and I was able to share his gift with him, and he shared it with me of, guess what, Mommy, I can read. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So just seeing his young mind and just explore and learn and grow, it's absolutely beautiful, and I'm blessed to be able to experience it.
I have to agree with Rashia. I think all kids have superpowers, really, but kiddos on the spectrum, especially, it's, you know, I had described it earlier as when you're outside looking in, right? If you have the ability to do that, you're looking at emotions unfiltered, right? Like, if you ever saw a child on the spectrum express joy or happiness, or any child with needs, joy, happiness, sadness, anger, it's emotion, it's raw, right? Unfiltered, no, like, societal masks telling you, like, oh, you know, you can be happy, but not this, you know, not too happy where you look silly, or like, you can be mad, but not mad where, like, you're tearing stuff up, you know what I mean? It's raw, unfiltered emotion, and I 100% agree, again, that we really need to, as a society, as a people, just really need to look at the beauty, right? Like, what can they do as opposed to, like, what they cannot do, right? Because if we look at it in that perspective, we can see so many beautiful things. They're so capable of doing so many things. I think we get so hung up on where the support is needed and not where, like, the ability is. So I, like, challenge you guys to do that moving forward.
You know, with Down syndrome, you know, it's a saying that, you know, you have a child with Down syndrome, you're part of the lucky few community. And, you know, I believe that, like everyone else is saying, that most or all kids with special needs have unique abilities and unique special powers. But I think one thing that they all have in common, you know, they're different, is the fact they have the ability to teach. And I know before my son was born, I prayed and asked God just to help work on my patience. You know, I'm a very, very, very impatient guy, and I've gotten better. But you know, I was very, very impatient. I was young at the time, too. And one thing that God helped me to see through Trey was that, you know, yeah, you want things done when you want it done, but ultimately, it's not up to you when things gonna be done. With Trey, he's gonna do it when he's ready. You may be ready for him to do it now, but he may not be ready for another year. And it's just experiencing that. It's kind of just taking it to my regular life. Like, you know, sometimes I ask God, well, I want this to happen now, but it's like, well, no, I mean, I know when you want it, but God may not be ready to give it to you when you ask for it. So you just have to, remain patient and just continue to do what you're supposed to do, and just like I'll have to get him ready for what I want him to do, and you have to continue to prepare yourself to be ready to receive the things that you're asking God for. So I'm grateful in the fact that my son is teaching me just to relax and be patient, and everything isn't on your turn. You just gotta trust God, and God will make everything happen when it's supposed to.
Terrence is dropping all the gems. So if you are taking notes. I share this, but AJ does something called scripting, which helps him to regulate. It's also a stim, but if he is watching a YouTube video, it could be 3 minutes, it could be 5 minutes. He has memorized that whole video. So he'll be playing, and then I see him reenacting that whole video out, every word for word, tone, everything. And so one of the really cool things is, before with my custody schedule, he wasn't able to come to church with me, but now he is every other week, and he'll be back there, and he's learned and memorized all of the Bible verses. And so it's, I can just prompt the first word, and he's going to recite that whole Bible verse. And some of you guys have seen, one of my favorites, he'll go, I can do everything into Christ who strengthens me. But very just all in. And it's really, it's just really beautiful.
Man, I just, my heart is so full, just because of the heart of our kids team and all of the people who just come together and form what is HopeX Church. And I just want to encourage you, the vision that we have for the future is I'm just telling you, if you ever want to be inspired, just pull one of these individuals aside and say, hey, just dream. Tell me a little bit about what the future of HopeX looks like. And the vision is just through the roof. And so what we're going to be able to do together, I'm just so excited, so honored to partner with each of you. And thank you. Thank you for being able to create space for moments for conversations like this. And I know it might feel like what I don't want is I don't want this to feel like an interruption. I want this to feel like this is a part of who we are and who we want to be. And so we want to lean into these conversations more, not less. We want to have opportunities like this. And I think you said something that was very key when you said like parents can sense when you're kind of skating around certain things. So we want to have those conversations. We want to lean into the empathy. We want to ask questions. We want to be mindful. But I just thank you. Thank you for each of you. Give yourselves a hand. Give these incredible parents a hand. So we're going to transition into a reflection time. And there's a couple things I want us to think about as we're reflecting. The one thing that I want us to really think about is I want us to think about the blessing of children and how God has sent us an incredible blessing in these babies, in these children. Our society has not done the best job at being inclusive. I mean, and even in the school system and the way that we frame conversations, we say things, the short bus and things like that. Those are things that I think slow down our progress of understanding one another, of being compassionate, and being the hands and feet of Jesus. And it for me as a pastor and us as a church community, it goes beyond just being loving. I just really believe that we reflect the heart of God when we embrace a different understanding. We were having this conversation, and Evelyn was talking, and she was like, she said, what we tend to do is we tend to teach children with needs how to interact in our world, in our society. We try to prepare them for whatever, when really the work is us learning how to step into their world and see with brand new eyes. And I said, you don't even know that the title of this conversation is Seeing with New Eyes. And that's what we want to do as a church, as a family. We just want to see with new eyes. We don't see things the way that the world does. We don't see our children the way the world does. We see with new eyes. We want to see heaven's perspective, God's heart, Jesus' heart for humanity, and that includes children with need and different abilities. And so as we reflect during this time, I want us to worship. I want us to thank God for these children, for children with different abilities and different giftings, and I just want us to have a heart of gratitude. I don't think we take time to say thank you, God, for our babies with special needs and different abilities. Can we do that in this moment of reflection? Like, let's thank God that he has blessed us with these children who have these superpowers and different abilities. Let's not look at it as a burden. It is a blessing, and it's something for us to thank God for. Are y'all here today, HopeX? Come on, let's stand up.